Okay, now it's working. Hello, good afternoon again. I'm not Dr. von Blanqui. He has to apologize. I wish you a nice afternoon on behalf of him. My name is Nikolaus Schumacher. I'm the CEO of a startup company, not in your area. We are digital health and collecting health data and providing health service on digital platforms. So I'm only now here as a moderator, and I have to apologize. In the program you see some other names, but two of them have skipped due to some emergency cases in the active hospital. But now with me here on the panel is Professor Lehrbach, one of the great serious entrepreneurs in biotech and of the real expert in this precision medicine. And then is Luis Falcon. You are from Spain, Italy? You have Spain and an entrepreneur, and you have here on your boots your company, what you are doing. And we have now these two presentations. Professor Lehrbach is so kind, and he will talk a little bit more. So, and after, yes, so if the disco coming again, yeah, so we know that we have to leave. So then after Professor Lehrbach, Louis will explain what he is doing, and perhaps after this discussion, you can follow him on his booth so that he can show what he is doing. But please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Does it work? Okay. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It is very interesting to talk here in an area which is quite focused on medicine, obviously. I want to talk about an area which is ignored to a large extent in many areas of medicine, and that has negative consequences which we can now change. We are at the edge of a revolution in the way we deal with medical questions, and I think you might not recognize the medicine of tomorrow very soon. The basic problem is we are all different. We have different genomes, we have different disease histories, we have different environment, we have different behavior, and in fact we also have different diseases which are superficially the same. Tumors arise by random changes in patients with different genomes, in cell types with different epigenomes, and are therefore even more different in a sense than the individuals. And in addition, they are heterogeneous, so subgroups of cells can very well also react differently to the same drug. If you have a broken arm, and you go to the doctor, you get a truly personalized treatment. The doctor has two things. He has the capability to characterize the exact situation in you in a surgical case by MRI and other imaging techniques, and he has the capability of predicting how different therapies could lead to different outcomes, and therefore pick the best, individually best therapy for your broken arm or other surgical problem. If you receive a drug, this is not what happens to you. Essentially what happens to you is analogous to having broken the left arm, and in the hospital you get a cast on the right arm because the doctor cannot distinguish the patients, and therefore if in a clinical trial by chance more people have had a broken right arm, the first line treatment is putting a cast on the right arm. And the reason for that is that the doctor has no information about the molecular networks which the drug affects, which also differ from patient to patient just as much as a broken arm will differ from patient to patient. And even if he would have the information, this is a much too complex problem for a human brain to predict the changes, the response of such a complex network to the complex action of different drugs, except on a very superficial level. So essentially, we have areas of medicine which are truly personalized, and we have areas of medicine which are not personalized at all. Surgery, as I said, you have both the data and the prediction capability. Therefore, you are getting a truly personalized treatment. In drug therapy, in many cases, you have neither. You have no data on the differences between the different patients, and you have no capability of predicting the outcome. So you have a first-line treatment. If you have biomarkers, you have some information on the differences between the patients, and you have a little bit of information on how that affects the prediction. So you have a stratified treatment. You define, based on the biomarkers, groups of patients which are still very heterogeneous, also heterogeneous in their response, but statistically more likely to respond or not respond to a specific drug. Precision medicine, the topic of the talk, is in principle able to give you the data. So you can use next generation sequencing and other techniques to characterize the individual. The problem is that the precision, that the predictions are still very often very imprecise, because we don't have a general tool to predict how the patient is going to respond, except, for example, to look for actionable variants or fusion proteins. So we are still in a situation of a stratification, stratified patients treatment. What we are trying to develop is in a project, in a flagship project, digital twins, which are exact analogs in all relevant aspects governing the drug response to individuals, patients, or in case of prevention measures, the individuals which are not sick. And in this case, we can use basically the same similar techniques we use in the precision medicine, but we have solved the prediction problem because we can test the virtual patients, the digital twins, against all possible therapies or in therapy combinations, and therefore know in advance, within the limits of the model, how the real patient is going to respond. Therefore, we don't make mistakes on real patients, we make them on virtual patients, which are replaceable. The consequences of the situation are dramatic. We have, in many disease areas, very low response rates to the drugs. Very few of the patients receiving a drug actually respond to it. There's a publication in Nature called Fittingly Imprecise Medicine, in which the authors argues that the response rate to the 10 highest grossing drugs in the US are between 4 and 25%. We have significant frequency of side effects. For example, almost 200 deaths by adverse drug reactions in Europe, more than, for example, deaths than you have in the same period due to colon cancer, which everybody is aware of. Few people are aware of the effect of the drugs on the death rates. And we have a very high cost of healthcare. In fact, I would expect that many of you don't know how much money Europe spends on healthcare every day. Because 4.5 billion, easy to calculate from the gross national product of the EU, and the roughly 10% of that product, that gross national product going to healthcare, to lead us to conclude that compared to the healthcare cost, financial problems like the Greek debt crisis are actually pretty minor. In addition, these costs all over the OECD countries tend to rise faster than the gross national product. So if you extrapolate, sooner or later you are going to spend the entire gross national product on healthcare, which is obviously not a tenable situation, particularly not in an aging society. So, and I would argue that close to 1 billion euros is spent per day on drugs which the patients don't respond to and or have unexpected side effects to, and the medical measures we then have to take and the economic consequences of those side effects. 5% of all hospitalization events are due to adverse drug reactions. 5% of the deaths in hospitals are due to adverse drug reactions. So this is a very serious problem which many people are not aware of. The reason this is not verbalized is that it has been up to a short time ago a problem for which there was no solution, and people do not like to talk about problems which are unsolvable. The reason we should now change that and talk about it is that the problem is now technically solvable. We just have to have the will and the resources to develop the solutions which are obvious. And a big part of the solution has come due to the enormous progress in some areas of technology, the whole genomics area. For example, we have been involved in sequencing the human genome in my department. We used machines in which we could, at the end, in a fantastic development, sequence 196 individual DNA fragments in one go. Now we can sequence billions of DNA fragments in a machine which is 30 meters from my office, which sequences 60 genomes at a cost of maybe roughly a few $100 per genome. So its lowest commercial cost for a genome is now $600. The first genome in the Human Genome Project cost us probably $3 billion. So it's a quite significant drop in cost. This is not the only area. There are very significant developments, for example, in mass spec technologies. This is a CyTOF system in which we can use spatially resolved mass spec techniques to follow maybe 40 different proteins in a single image with cellular resolution. It's a fantastic advance, and there are many other techniques which are moving very rapidly now, allowing us to characterize an individual more accurately than we could characterize, in a sense, all of humanity a few years ago. So this type of techniques have been used, for example, in CTGA to characterize roughly 35,000 cancer sequences, so we know a lot about what is going on in cancer patients. But we also have to find out what is going on in individual patients, because the statistics obviously is only a statistics, and that's one of the results that different tumors, for different tumors you very often find so-called actionable variants which allow you to assign patients to either drugs or clinical trials. Alakis Theranostics is a company which we have set up to basically make the technology which we develop at Max Planck available to patients on a large scale, has in particular developed a very deep analysis. This type of sequence characterization of tumors has been used in many different forms. starting from just looking at single mutations over cancer panels. One well-known company, for example, in Boston, is sequencing a few hundred candidate genes, no RNA, no genome, patient genome. We carry out deep exome low coverage genome of both the tumor and the patient, and in particularly important also a very deep transcriptome analysis, because anybody who knows biology must realize that gene is only active if it's transcribed. So it's just as easy to inactivate the recessive tumor gene by methylating the promoter, which you will not see in a panel sequencing, as by a mutation which you might or might not see in a panel sequencing if you happen that the gene is in a panel, and if it turns out that this gene is not already a variant in the patient genome, which most people also don't look at. So we generate and analyze hundreds of times more information than almost most other groups in this area, particularly commercial companies. That's a type of report which then we generate either from the patients who come to the to Alacris to get their tumors analyzed, or from the patients analyzed in research projects. We have, for example, one research project on a metastatic melanoma in which we go from the characterization up to the drug response of the patient. And those are, for example, some examples out of this particular research project. So you see that metastasis can simply vanish if you pick the right drug based on this type of deep analysis. And that's another case. So the problem in those cases is that those miracle cures are very often not permanent, because a part of this variant, part of the tumor cells survive and then become resistant, particularly if the patient has been treated with genotoxic chemotherapeutics, because everybody knows what happens if you mutagenize a bacterial cell population and then put it under a strong selection. You make sure that you get variants which survive whatever selection you have. This is, however, only still precision medicine. So this works well if you find a change, a variant, a protein fusion. But what we really want is to be able to provide basically every patient with the optimal therapy. And as I've said, for that we follow the example which we have used successfully in all other cases, except for medicine and drug development. In complex situations, we cannot avoid mistakes, but we can avoid the consequences of the mistakes by making them on computer models without risk to anybody, without cost, without time loss. So we develop cars on virtual crash tests. We train pilots over flight simulators. We would not make an electric toothbrush in reality before we have tested it exhaustively as a computer model. So it's particularly strange that in a situation in which our own lives depend on, we still like to gamble with drugs which have a statistical probability of working or killing us. The reason for that is a forecast model is only as good as the data put into the model. If you took the best weather forecast model on a supercomputer, which usually gets initialized with 75 terabytes of information from sensors, with the amount of data which the doctor usually has available about the individual patient, blood pressure and maybe glucose level, the sophisticated weather forecast model would at best be able to predict if it's summer or winter, but not any serious make any serious predictions. But this is now a problem, a technical problem, which has been with us for a long time, but which is now getting solved, partly solved by the progress in NGS and the many other diagnostic techniques, partly by the enormous advances in computing power. Supercomputers also tend to improve thousandfold every 10 years, or at least have historically. So we have more and more computing power. We have a better and better characterization of the individual and the individual patient. So we have a chance to do exactly the same thing which has worked in all other areas in medicine and drug development. The models are obviously different. We are not dealing with partial differential equations. We're dealing in this case with object-oriented modeling systems, which generate systems of differential equations which can be solved, and the main roadblock at the moment, which is simply a matter of computing power and resources, is to correctly parameterize those differential equations. And we have made a huge amount of progress, but I don't have the time to get into it. So essentially, we have object-oriented systems which basically are fed with our view of how pathways work, how mutations affect the signaling in the tumor. That's the overall model, so it's complex. It has to be complex to be able to represent correctly the enormous number of differences between different tumors, between different patients, and the many potential drugs and drug targets which we might want to predict. So this is an example in which this modeling approach has worked already very early in our model development, using a very simple model. In this case, we had, in a precursor of the grant we have running now, we analyzed metastatic melanoma patients. One patient, a woman with metastatic uveal melanoma, was not able to tolerate the normal treatment because of side effects. Therefore, the doctors tried the drugs which were predicted by the models. And so the rows are the patients, the columns, the drugs. So this row marked is this patient 9, and the drug effectiveness is displayed as the intensity of the blue color, indicating that MYC, as a surrogate marker for cell division, is affected by the drug. So basically, the MYC level, where we have this intense blue color, the MYC level of the tumor gets very low or to zero due to the drug. And it turns out there are 2 drugs in there. One was a MEK1, MEK2 inhibitor, which at that point hadn't been approved. The other one was a drug which usually was used in rheumatoid arthritis, not in cancer, but it had been approved and therefore could be used, and it kept, according to the doctors, it kept the metastasis stable for a year till a new metastasis arose. As I said, if you use chemotherapy, you already prepare the seeds for resistant tumors later on. Now, the counterpart of this is use of this type of modeling in drug development. The more drugs we have available in testing virtual on the virtual patient, the better. And the amount of drugs is very limited by the fact that pharma companies are the only business area in which the expected result is failure. So a pharma company starting with one particular candidate has a 99.9 something chance that this particular candidate will fail at one of the many steps of the development process. If VW had the same approach to making cars, I think they would have even more problems than they have already. So this apheresis leads to enormously high costs because each drug reaching the market has to pay for all those failures. And so if you divide the total research spending by the number of drugs reaching the market, you, in a paper published by Forbes some time ago, the numbers were 4 to 12 billion per drug, per approved drug. Some of those drugs then by relatively modest medical benefits at relatively high cost. So the situation is far from optimal, and I would argue and keep arguing to the pharma companies that probably most of the drugs they work with and which fail in their hands would help specific patients. We just have to find out which patients. If you run a clinical trial on 20 responders and they get up from the deathbed and go on vacation, you have a very good case to talk to the EMA or the FDA. And if you run virtual clinical trials on a compound which has just been synthesized, or possibly, if the docking programs are good enough, which has not yet been synthesized, you save enormous costs, you speed up the process, and in principle, I don't see a reason why we couldn't cut the costs of developing new drugs by 2 orders of magnitude or more. So from the billions to the tens of millions up to approval. So essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. Obviously, what we want are useful models. We don't want all singing, all dancing models. We want to pragmatically focus on the models which describe all the relevant parts we have to consider. For example, if you have a cancer patient who receives an oral drug, we have to model the microbiome of the intestine because that can modify the drug. We have to model pharmacogenomic effects based on the genome of the patient. We have to model the effect of the drug both on the tumor, ideally including the heterogeneity, and the normal tissues to avoid unacceptable side effects. And if you're talking about immune therapy and immune response of the drugs, then we have to model the immune system. So it's not going to be Facebook entries, but it's going to be very hardcore molecular information. I would therefore not call the things which we are using big data, but deep data, because big data is not what we need. Will every human in the future have her personal models as protection against dangers, to get the appropriate treatment, as aid for the doctor in therapy and prevention? Prevention is molecularly personalized. Prevention could, for example, have an enormous effect on our health and our healthcare systems, but also in support of wellness. So in the future, you might be able to decide you want to run a marathon and test what you have to do on your personal model without getting up from the sofa. So for that, we obviously need money, and so we trustfully have approached the EU to try to get one of the flagship projects, 1 billion euros over 10 years to develop truly personalized medicine. We are now in the 3rd stage of a complex project. We will find out this month if we are through to the next stage. So if you happen to meet Angela Merkel, you could maybe tell her that this would be a good idea. I would argue it's a very clear case. Without DigiTwins, we will, over the next 7-year framework program, spend 10 trillion euros on healthcare, roughly 2 trillion on drugs, which the patients don't respond to, and their medical treatment and economic consequences of those have, as I said, the population of Milan die of adverse drug reactions, come 7 years closer to the implosion of the European healthcare system. In a sense, we are rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic rather than wondering about icebergs. The anticipated budget for DigiTwins corresponds to 5 hours of health expenditures in Europe, or the amount which we could save in probably 10 hours. So I think it is a pretty convincing case, if for a change, which admittedly is rare, the decision could be made logically. The work I'm mentioning has been carried out by many people, a major part by the group of Marie-Laure Jasper at the Max Planck Institute, and the group at Alacus Theranostics, a company which we have set up to try to change the world, which by definition you cannot do from a research institute. We work very closely with the hospitals, particularly Charité, but also other hospitals, and we also work very closely with mathematicians, computer experts who help us to solve the enormous computational and algorithmic problems which we are facing. And okay, there was a slide which I had in which there's a lot of awards which Alacus got for being an innovative SME and being in the 5th position of the total EU funding in Europe. So there are some people who believe this is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very nice and good lecture to come in this very deep stuff. Are you still invited by the pharmaceutical industry or not?
I think they are getting there. slowly but surely. I just got an invitation to a very large meeting of all the pharma companies. So I think they are softening up.
Yes, softly. So you get not so many Christmas cards from them, yeah?
I think the blockbuster model is still,
it's still over.
In their mind.
So it's obviously new model or marketing models beyond the pill. It's all marketing and demonstrates the weaknesses of the drug therapy. You have some questions to Professor
We
Lehrer?
don't give up.
No. Okay. But when do you think it become real? So it's real, it is implementable, it's how open are the payers to pay for it?
Okay, it's real. We are treating cancer patients who simply come to us. Actually, we obviously have to send them back to their doctor, because legally the doctor has to ultimately approach us. We use both the standard precision medicine approaches, which we are obviously particularly good at, because we use much more information than, for example, foundation medicine. And we use the modeling to potentially find additional drugs which would be usually non-obvious. This is something which has to be improved. It just needs the resources to develop it rapidly enough. The problem is that logic in healthcare is very different from that in other areas.
Sure.
We have...
we all are fools that we are in healthcare, so...
the thing I found quite surprising, for example, is that Germany alone spent probably 100 billion of the money of the electricity customers on subsidizing the electricity from solar cells, following the logical argument that the only way to make those systems more cheaper and better is to subsidize them, subsidize their use. Electric cars are subsidized with 4,000 euros per car. Cancer patients are subsidized with €0. The healthcare system only pays for whatever actually is most cost effective at the moment. We're talking to the health insurances to try to convince them. I think we have a good case because it turns out they spend now on panels which gives them a lot less information than the one we can generate as much money as it would cost to do this very deep analysis. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to get the deep analysis reimbursed in the German and European healthcare system. But I'm surprised that the same argument, which is perfectly accepted in other areas, doesn't seem to be considered logically in healthcare. If you can explain that, it would be really grateful.
Maybe you see it, I guess it's all this discussion which you have in health economics. Yeah? You find for modern therapy a lot, you have business cases, but it's difficult to get them real. Yeah, so sometimes you have the resistance by the doctors who don't understand it. Sometimes you have the resistance by the payers who calculate different. Yeah, so it's all the issue.
But in view of the fact that the government should be aware of the fact that the healthcare systems are going to explode in the foreseeable future if we don't switch from a personnel-intensive medicine of today to data and model-driven healthcare system of the future, personnel costs are going to keep rising in aging societies by necessity. Both the diagnostic techniques and the computing power becomes cheaper by 3 orders of magnitude every decade. So it doesn't take much to understand that this is going to change the way we should do things. And the fact that this is not completely obvious to everybody, I find surprising.
Thank you for your deep insight which you gave us. Now I'd like to hand over perhaps to the final speaker, to Louis. Please tell us what you are offering and how you see the solution. I hope that we can change the presentation.
So can we put it on the presentation mode? Let's see if, yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Please
So
start.
thank you, Schumacher, for having me here. Thank you, Medica. I'm a medical doctor and I'm a computer scientist. And after Professor Hans, talk about all the molecular basis on disease, I will be complementing that on the environmental factors that affect our health and disease. So, first of all, you might say, what is a guy talking about precision medicine and his project is a social project? Well, I would say that epigenetics, and we'll see it a little bit later, it's so important in today's each other's life that it must be taken into an account. Our project started here 12 years ago in Argentina, in rural areas. And our goal is to provide health and education and freedom and equity in healthcare. So I know for sure 3 things. I'm a doctor, I'm a computer scientist, and I will not die rich. And that takes a lot of load out of yourself, okay? Because we are focusing on those people that really need help. And we are an NGO. So at that moment that you say, hey, Luis, what is your focus on life? Well, we try to provide freedom and equity in healthcare. That immediately makes you a person that is not going to die rich. And that's good. That's actually good. That's actually great. You don't have that problem to deal with it anymore. And this is what we do. So we have a health and hospital information system, and we try to outreach people with the benefits of free software in healthcare. New Health, it's a system that deals with these 4 functional levels. Okay, it deals with people, first of all. Before patients, we deal with people, the demographics, lifestyle, domiciliary units. Then we have the typical EMR, medical-patient relationship, genetics, labs, etc. Then we have to take care of that institution, right? Financing, billing, stock management, pharmacies, and so on. And finally, we make sense of all that transactional data that we've been collecting over the days and years. So on one side, you have transactional operational data. On the other side, you are going to have analytical information. When we talk about free, we talk about freedom. And that's why the Free Software Foundation adopted GNU Health as an official project. Freedom means I can see the source code. It means I can modify it, I can improve it, and feedback the community to make it even better the next release. All the components on GNU Health rely on free technology. If one of the components of the chain is not free, the whole thing goes down, like a domino effect. So in order to have a free system, you need to have all their components to be free, as in freedom. So where is GNU Health? Well, we go for very little places in the rainforest of Africa, like in this case in Cameroon, to the largest public hospitals in Asia, like AIMS, or national public health system in Laos or in Jamaica. So, very little places in the middle of the rainforest, very large research institutions in India, and public health systems. And the three of them are equally important. And I stress that because sometimes, we tend to forget that these people have the same value as the richest guys in the world. And if nobody takes care of them, they are going to die in solitude. And that's what's happening to 20,000 kids every single day dying of social diseases. So here we're talking about precision medicine and all the molecular basis of health and disease, which is very important, but we cannot forget that most determinants of health are social. And we have to keep that in mind every single day. We work with multilateral organizations like WHO, in programs like Universal Health, in Africa and South America, and we of course use their standards also to incorporate it in our systems. And of course the academia. Academia in different places of the world have joined us in different ways, and we have a program called GNU Health Alliance for Academic and Research Institutions that allow us to work together as a community. And I like to make a synonymia here about precision medicines and medicine and take it more into the personal level. When we talk about precision medicine, sometimes we just think about, wow, molecules, amino acids, DNA, and so on. But if we take that and make it personal, then we have a completely different story, because we are so used to being in the system of health, in the system of disease, which is reductionist by definition. We, in the Western society, deal with patients, we deal with sick people, we deal with diseases. And we try to shift that to the system of health. Dealing with people before patients. Dealing with all these socioeconomic determinants of health and disease. It would be much better if we have good public health campaigns that will complement, of course, the molecular basis of health and disease. But they have to act together. They are not compartments separated by walls. Each of these determinants of health have an effect on the other. And if we don't have that in mind, we are losing the whole picture. Talking about genetics, here we have two identical twins, genetically identical. Yet one is healthy and the other one is not. It will suffer from diabetes and probably cancer, and of course obesity. So, somebody says genes load the gun and environment pulls the trigger. And here, and Professor talked before about a little bit of methylation. This is what's happening. The diet of one of them was different. And not only this little guy is doing much better now, but future generations are also going to do much better. Because those epigenetic marks are going to be passed to future generations. Now, coming to us, 1/3 of the world population is infected with the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So, probably here, some of us have. Now, who actually will get sick? It's, for most of us, Mycobacterium will be just a neighbor. Not a very friendly neighbor, but it's a neighbor. And you will live the rest of your life and die from something different. Now, why tuberculosis is sometimes a sentinel disease for AIDS? Because when you have AIDS, your immune system goes down and tuberculosis shows up. In most of the cases, it's because of both of them, by the way, are social diseases. So if you keep yourself healthy and you eat well and your living conditions have enough ventilation in your house and you don't suffer from overcrowding, you're going to be fine. Now, if your social status changes, if you are going to be excluded from the society, chances are you are going to suffer from TB sooner or later in your life. Canadians are very good in public health, and here you have that 50% of the determinants of health are coming from how do you do in society. And only 15%, 15%, has to do with your genetic imprint. What is the access to healthcare? The physical environment will make the rest out of it. I'm not saying that it's not important. On the contrary, and we embrace the molecular basis of health and disease. As a matter of fact, here we have part of the information that we send or that we collect on our daily basis. And that is the medical history, the family history are there, as well as the socioeconomic determinants, so we already talked about them. And we use EVI, UniProt, KB, for example, to have all these natural variants that might have an impact on our health at that molecular level that we were talking about. So now we are going to have the three main components, right? So on one side, we have the genetic determinants. On the other side, we have our medical history and clinical history. And the last part of it is those socioeconomic determinants of health that we were talking about. Now, for me, that is precision medicine, because I'm talking precisely to one individual. So if I have this holistic picture, then I have a much better idea of how to approach and how to cure or try to cure this person that I have. Instead of using the concept of medical records, we love to be a bit more romantic, and we use the concept of book of life, where each of us have a book of life and is made of many pages. Each of these pages is a relevant event on our life. And those can be demographical, biographical, medical, or society made, right? And each of them will have its own category. So in social, we have exclusion, stress, lifestyle, family, violence-related events, and so on. And in medical, we have what we know about medical history, right? Encounters, surgeries, GPA, etc. So to put an example on how we take a BRCA1 record here, we not only have the natural variant specific to that gene or protein, but we are saying, well, what is the family history here? What is your susceptibility having this is just breast cancer, or is also giving you the possibility of having ovarian cancer? Your mother, your father, your siblings. And of course, medical history and lifestyle. Do you smoke? Do you drink? Are you obese? Well, all that information is going to be within one single record. And now I have a complete picture of it. It of course has to be easy also, not to be read by humans, but also by machines. So on one side, we have relational databases for transactional systems, and on the other side, we're going to have document-based databases that deal much better with big data. And this is what we propose. We propose to have a federated system of databases that allow us to collect all these main determinants of health in a person's life. Okay, so the New Health Federation tries to tackle different challenges that we have today, and one of them is data isolation. You know, many systems work like silos. They work on their own context, but it's hard to get that data back and forth from it. And the other thing, that we are complex beasts. Professor was showing before, you know, how complex is the whole thing, and how one tumor may react in another way in another individual, and so on. So we know that there are specific natural variants that are clearly pathogenic, but there are so many others that we don't know the significance or the clinical significance of that. And I think that if we have this federated model, with all the lifestyle, with all the clinical information, and the past history from their family, then we might be able to move that specific variant from the unknown significance to a phenotypic or specific phenotypic clinical information. But for that, I need to have all this data, and not just at regional level, but at global level. Why not? And this is just some community servers that we have. So researchers and computer scientists can work and see demo and work on their APIs and so on to develop tools that will allow them to integrate themselves within this federated model that we propose. So the federation can be of 2 nodes or can be of millions of nodes. That depends on the legislation, depend on the project that you have, depend on your country, etc., etc. But again, the free software model allows you to embrace it without having to ask anything, you know? And this is what we need to do if we really want to embrace personalized or precision medicine. As a community, not as a companies. Because when companies are around, it's good, but you know, I love the term community-based projects. And this is my last slide, and I will just leave it here. Maybe it will kick in some discussion. First of all, privacy. You know, we need to have software and we need to have operating systems that are free. By free means I need to see what is the source code of that operating system and that software that is running. Because otherwise it's going to be a black box. I know what data I'm putting in, but I don't know where it's going out. You know, and this is key. And raise your hand who's using GNU Linux. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. Good. Well, I propose the rest to use GNU Linux too. You will be safer. The other thing is, I think that we have too much technology, and that is displacing the human factor. We need to improve the doctor-patient relationship. And today, when you are here, this looks like science fiction. Looks like, you know, we hear talks about artificial intelligence, virtual reality. Well, the reality is what we saw in the rainforest. That is the reality of those people. And are we going to make precision medicine and therapy to those kids? Or is it going to be too costly for them to live with hepatitis C or HIV? Are we going to give them those meds to save them? Or are they going to die because they are not going to have the possibility of getting those drugs? And we cannot forget that health is not a business. And that doesn't mean that you cannot make an ethical business model in health. But the most important part of health is that it's a human right. And if we don't have that present, we are in trouble. Because then you are making a business out of health, and that is not good. As you can see, I come from public health, but I have no problem with private institutions working in the health arena, as long as they are ethical, as long as they don't lock in patients, as long as they provide good level of care, no matter what is their social status. If we do that, then we are in the same page. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. It was very impressive. One quick question. You are getting donations from public or from who is financing your approach?
As I said before, I will not die rich, but we are getting some donations, for example, from Cabildo de Gran Canaria. That's like a local government in Spain that deals with international help. And OpenSUSE, that you saw it here, is a GNU Linux distribution, who is also embracing the project and helping. But yeah, that's always the problem with most NGOs. You know, we really, really need financial needs, but you know, we work most out of a community level, and dealing with academic institutions also helps a lot in making the project.
And do you build up a global network, or we saw your pictures with the hotspots all over the world? Is it a dream or is it close to real?
Well, this is a reality. Well, it has the potential, and that's why I put "let us build", because you can build it, but there are so many regulations, and there are so many stop signs that you will find along the line. You know, first of all, it's the adoption. You know, and will, because it's free, the people has the freedom to share that into another federated networks or to keep it for themselves, and that is their will and their choice at the end of the day.
Okay.
But the technology is there, and of course, I believe that if we build this community-based federated health network, we are going to be doing much better as a community and as a society as a whole.
Okay. Any questions from your side?
Do you have any contacts to George Church by any chance? Do you know George Church?
No, I work
think that
with.
you should maybe change that. He has developed a personal genome project, basically by making all the genome and the health data available. Just read up on it and try to make some contacts. He's working pretty closely with us, and he's very much along the same lines. Harvard Medical School. The other thing is, I think your estimate of the role of those technologies in developing countries is unlikely to be true. I think for the developing countries, it's going to be much easier to set up a high-tech medical system than to have the classical structures which we have in Europe, just as much as now in Africa everything functions by mobile phones, and mobile phones with apps and appropriate devices might very well be able in the future to do a lot of the stuff we need to do. So I think in the future it's going to be much easier to set up the new technologies in those areas than the current ones.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that sometimes impoverished countries, I don't like the term developing countries because sometimes they are much more developed as us as a culture-wise, you know, but I would say impoverished, you know, or impoverished countries. But you're right, you usually find more flexibility in order to, you know, adopting a system as GNU Health, because all those regulations, they might not be there. And, you know, Jamaica has it for over 4 years now, and Laos for over 3 years. And you know, so far so good. And the good thing about this is also capacity building. I think that is key. When you were talking about rural areas, I was like, yes, that's what they need. They need to have local people implementing the project and be completely independent from, you know, the north side or the north hemisphere. But I agree with you that there is a lot to do there. And if we are able to collect all this information from the socio-economic determinants, plus, you know, all the information that people like you are doing in terms of molecular basis, I think it would be wonderful.
Thank you. I wish you, with your approach, a lot of luck. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you that you're coming here. Sorry, we have to apologize. In the plan, there were much more activity in these hours, but it's the last day of the Medica. It's the last hours of the Medica. A lot of people disappeared. I wish you a nice trip back, and see you perhaps next year here again in Düsseldorf. Okay. And you can then report about your progress. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye.